I recently moved to a new city and have been walking almost everywhere in order to get a better handle on my surroundings. It's actually kind of nice to live someplace where everything you need is in walking distance. I live in a large metro city on the West Coast, and it's pretty well populated, so I feel safe walking alone most of the time. A couple of nights ago, I had just got back from running errands when my boyfriend texted me from work and asked if I could pick up something from the store for him. I was admittedly a tiny bit annoyed, as I had just got back to the apartment, but I said okay. I figured I could just drive back to the store. Then again, the weather had just finally started getting nice here, so I decided to walk instead. The store is just a little over a mile away, and I was sure I could be there and back in no time, so I headed out. I'm prone to getting lost in the grocery store. I'll go in for one thing and find myself wandering around for quite a while, and suddenly my basket is full of things I never knew I needed. This evening was no exception, and I wound up lurking around the store for about an hour, tossing random things in the basket. I realized time and daylight was getting away from me, and quickly checked out. I stepped out of the store. The air was still warm, but the sun was beginning to set. I started walking back toward the apartment the same way I had come. It was uneventful for the most part, and quieter than usual. I passed a few people out for an evening jog, and a dog walker or two, but no one else. I was about halfway home and heading into a slightly less populated, more industrial neighborhood when I stopped at a crosswalk, waiting for the light to change. The walk light was just about to come on for me when a man who looked like he was about to cross the street heading toward me suddenly walked in front of traffic that was beginning to move and crossed perpendicular to me. So once I crossed, he was now heading the same direction as me instead of away from me, just on the other side of the street, if that makes any sense. He was a young guy, maybe younger than me, early to mid-20s. He was decent looking and seemed well groomed. He was wearing gray jeans, a black t-shirt, and an orange hoodie. But something about the way he walked put me off. I don't really know how to explain it, but something about his walk just struck me as strange. The way he just ambled about into the street. Something was just strange about him. I actually needed to cross to the side of the road he was on, but I was on alert, and something told me to keep my distance. So I stayed on my side of the street and kept heading in the direction of my apartment, feeling his eyes on me as I walked. Sure enough, as soon as some people passed him on the sidewalk, he began accosting them. Better than me, I thought. There were two of them, and at least they had a dog. I quickened my pace and quickly looked over my shoulder. The people had brushed him off, and he was hurrying a bit more. It seemed like he was trying to catch up with me. I felt as though he was following me, but I couldn't be sure. He kept talking to himself, or maybe to me. It was hard to make out what he was saying from across the street, but he sounded pissed. We passed an office building, with him being on the same side of the street as the building. A man stepped outside just then to smoke, and Creeper Man began accosting him as well. I used the opportunity to quicken my pace again. I wanted to get away from this dude. I glanced over my shoulder again when he pointed at me. "See that pretty little thing over there?" he said with a smirk, to the man having a smoke. I tried to give my best help-me eyes to the guy with the cigarette. Smoking guy looked super annoyed, and he immediately put his cigarette out and went back inside. Thanks for nothing, smoking guy. I was totally alone now, and still about a 10-minute walk to my apartment. My city is definitely a walking city, and there are usually people everywhere, but of course, tonight there was no one. Maybe I'm just being silly, I thought. I do have a tendency toward being hypervigilant, so I decided to test him. I quickened my pace to an almost jog. Across the street, so did the man. I slowed way down. He did too. I stayed standing at a crosswalk where I had the walk signal. So did he. I crossed against the light when it changed, and he did too. And now he was really, really pissed. He was cursing up a storm and flailing his arms about, and his hoodie was off now. I really needed to be on his side of the street in order to get home at this point, but I was too scared to cross, and even if he left me alone, I didn't want him following me all the way back to my apartment. I wasn't really sure what to do. I patted my jacket pocket where I usually keep my mace, and realized I'd left it in a different jacket. I was alone, and armed with a bag of drugstore goodies, and now it was getting really fucking dark outside. I had walked several blocks out of the way at this point, afraid of getting too near to him. I don't know what kept him from just coming to my side of the street the whole time. I was trying my hardest to ignore him, and I think it was pissing him off, but maybe also keeping him at bay. The whole time, I never felt him take his eyes off me, and he was staring right at me whenever I dared to glance over. Finally, by some miracle, I came to a busy intersection where several people were standing on the corners. Crazy Creeper Man threw his arms in the air one last time and yelled, "God damn it!" and continued muttering to himself before suddenly turning and running in the opposite direction. I did a run-walk across the street and all the way home, glancing over my shoulder the whole time. I don't know what his intentions were, but it was one of the few times in my life where I've gotten that truly awful feeling in the pit of my stomach about a person. I'm so glad I chanced upon all those people at the right moment, and now I always carry my mace with me. I woke up home alone around 7 p.m. I'm pretty young, and I'd like to mention this has been one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. It was 9 p.m., and I was going around with my usual business, talking to some of my friends and playing games. All of a sudden, I hear a knock on my front door. It happens often, so I just put it off as it's some random guy wanting to talk to me about Jesus or something. About 20 seconds pass, and I hear the guy knock again, so I get up and I shout, "Who is it?" No response. I sit down and just act like it never happened. About a few minutes pass when I immediately hear banging coming from the back room. I see two of my cats run into my parents' room to hide. At this point, I was just so done with this, and I called the cops, and then I hear moving in my back room. I quickly shut my door quietly. They pick up after what seems like forever. I'm freaking out, and I quickly tell the police my address. I had to repeat it a few times because I was panicking. All of a sudden, I hear my room's doorknob turning. I put my shoulder on the door and decide to play dumb and say, "Who is it?" Silence. And then I hear the person walk away. I then hear banging around the living room. After about 3 minutes of this, I hear a loud bang on my door and then banging in the back room. A minute passes when the operator says, "The police are already on their way." Then I hear a knock on my window, which I assume was the guy walking out. About 5 minutes pass, and I hear the woman on the phone say to me, "The police are at your door." I try and make sure a few times, and then I tell her that I would be putting the phone down to go see. I talk with the police, one of the officers being a good friend of my family's. I assume he heard the address and immediately drove over here to make sure nothing happened. They checked around the house and told me I should probably put something over the door, and then they decided to leave. After all of this happened, my parents finally got home. My mom screaming that the bastard took the living room TV. They shut the back door and put a large board over it to keep it from moving. My cat was also missing at the time. Just a couple of seconds after writing this, I actually found her, meowing and eating. After this happened, I'm just glad I didn't get hurt and I wasn't still sleeping. It was a Saturday, and I was bored of staying at home all day, so I decided I wanted to go for a quick run. I had also had an anxiety attack a few days earlier in my PE class, and was feeling really stressed, so I knew that running would allow me not only to try and alleviate me from all that, but also reduce my anxiety symptoms. I live super close to the sea, and in a quite mountainous area, and there is this specific trail that I really like. You can see the sea very clearly, and you'd be practically at peace, since hardly anyone ever walks here. I was 5 minutes into my little jog when I heard a weird grunting from behind me. There was a curve at the trail, so I couldn't see if someone was approaching, but I shrugged it off. I then took my phone out and to take a few pictures of the sunset, only to realize the grunting had gotten louder. I looked towards the curve and saw this really old, grumpy-looking fellow. I thought it was weird since, like I said, not many people ever walk through this specific trail. I ignored him. Then he started to approach me, really trying to get close to me, grunting even louder, too. My neighborhood is small, and I had never seen this sketchy guy before. Nervous and a little worried, since I was on my own, I calmly told him to back off or that I'd scream for help. He acknowledged my answer with yet another grunt and an ugly yellow smile before dragging himself back towards the curve and then slowly disappearing. I thought it was odd, but since he left, I decided to continue going through the trail. I stopped to take a few more pictures, even sat down a little while, breathing in the fresh air. Eventually, I walked back. As I was walking back, I noticed there was this piece of paper sticking out from a little bush that sat on the side of the trail, almost close to the entrance of the trail. I was certain that the paper was not there when I first arrived. I then remembered that creepy guy earlier, noticing he was already gone and nowhere to be found. Curiosity got the better of me, and I went to take a closer look. The paper was folded together, and it had a sticky substance at the back, which glued the folded sides together. I unfolded it, only to find the horrendous sight of a naked woman drawn with pencil. I took a quick picture of it with my phone, and ran home as fast as I could. The word fuck is clearly written underneath the female figure, and the F oddly elongated. I couldn't quite decipher the other word underneath, but the scariest thing of it all was that the number on the note, 967, was printed on the back of my shirt, and was now written down on the paper. I knew it was for me. I took a picture of the note before leaving, because I was already thinking about informing my parents. I told my parents, and they told the police about it. The police couldn't do much, though they did ask me for the description of the guy, and I showed them the note. The only thing they've done so far is patrol my area a little more than usual, just in case. I see a police car drive past my house, with at least one officer in it more often now. They used to only do safety patrols on Sundays. They have not found the guy, nor have I encountered him again. I'm most certain that the guy's intentions were far from innocent. I'm just glad I wasn't raped, and he could have very well done it, since I was on my own. Before I begin, let me apologize preemptively for being a bit sparse on detail. This is not my story. This was one told to me by my aunt on Memorial Day when I was visiting up north for a family reunion. Back in the late 90s, early 2000s, my aunt worked in an office, pretty ordinary workplace. Cubicles, cooler chatter, copy machine jams. The guy in the cubicle next to her, Thomas, however, was anything but ordinary. He was the weird guy at this place. You know the type. The guy everyone kind of feels off around. The guy that all his coworkers think has the capacity to go postal one day. The guy no one really wants to spend too much time alone with. Being his cubicle mate, my aunt had to put up with a lot of his oddities. Sometimes he'd peek over the divider at her and just stare. Oftentimes he'd make strange comments about female coworkers' appearances. One thing that really struck her as odd was oftentimes she'd hear him whimpering, as if he was quietly weeping on the other side. Nothing super threatening, but enough to make her feel a tad ill at ease around him. One day, she notices that Thomas is gone, and his cubicle is cleared out. The water cooler chatter picks up. It is revealed that Thomas has been axed and charged and convicted for making threatening phone calls to a couple female coworkers, one including a rape threat. Not only that, but hidden surveillance cameras during the stealthy investigation of these allegations had revealed that the strange whimpering my aunt heard from Thomas was not him crying, but from him masturbating in his cubicle. He was subsequently sentenced to 75 days in prison with 3 years parole. My aunt thinks, good riddance, and moves on with her life. A few years pass, and my aunt is watching the news one night when something catches her attention. Thomas has apparently been arrested again, this time upon investigation of a murder of a 9-year-old girl in Tahoe. Once proceedings began and media attention was being garnered, she was overwhelmed by an influx of new information about Thomas. It turned out that the bad vibes everyone at the office felt were for a good reason. Thomas was one sick guy. Much worse than they'd once thought. Trials had brought to attention that Thomas had been sexually abusing his son TJ since he was 5 or 6 years old. And as TJ got older, Thomas got him to bring home young girls for him to molest regularly, including TJ's own girlfriends. Eventually, Thomas had dragged TJ so far into his depravity that this culminated in the teen luring a 9-year-old girl into the apartment, where his father brutally raped and murdered her. TJ even covered for his father when the girl's parents came searching for her as she lay tied up in the back bedroom before going off to dump her lifeless body down an embankment along the side of the highway. Tragically, a very bright young girl had to die for him to finally be caught, but Thomas was convicted and furthermore died in prison in 2001. No one will ever have the misfortune of meeting him again.